So a couple interesting examples about that would be like the Navy SEALs. When they operate, they like actually recruit for flow to a degree, the types of people that will get into a group flow situation, and they don't really have hierarchy. So anyone who takes the lead in a given moment is the one everyone follows. And if that changes in the next moment, they'll all follow that person. You can almost think of like a flock of birds or a school of fish, the way that they move in sync and in unison with each other.
Today on the program, we have Flowstate Coaching and Consulting and Life by Design Lab founder Rishi Behari. Rishi started these businesses in order to help others find joy and purpose in their lives and work. His coaching philosophy leverages powerful insights from cutting-edge neuroscience research to empower organizations and individuals alike to perform at their peak, while falling in love with the process along the way. Welcome to Startup Different. Hey, Dave here. Before we get into today's episode, Chris and I wanted to give you some exciting news. We wrote a book. Surprise! It's called Startup Different, the myth-busting blueprint for your multi-million-dollar business. And it comes out October 1st, 2024. Like our show, we're trying to pay it forward to our fellow entrepreneurs to help you learn from our successes and failures. The book busts over 33 myths, tells some of our most hilarious stories, and gives you many of our best tools to build, scale, and exit your business. Pre-orders for paperback, ebook, and audiobook start Labor Day, Monday, September 2nd. You'll find the book at all the major online retailers, including Amazon. Check it out. We think it's pretty great. And now, on to the show. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Startup Different. I'm Dave, he's Chris, and today we got another guy. His name's Rishi. Rishi, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Happy to be chatting with you guys.
Yeah, we're happy to have you as well. And today, obviously, Rishi, we're thrilled to have you, known you for a while, and I really wanted to get your insight and expertise on, a lot of different things. And kind of like as we said in the intro, you focus a lot on sort of like coaching and consulting. And I really like to talk about this because I'm kind of a geek for culture. I didn't realize this till like a couple seasons into this show, but I talk a lot about like company cultures and that kind of stuff. And I often think about one of these big things that's sort of like a culture killer, which is stress. And, I actually read this HBR article lately that said, the latest like Stress in America survey, which I guess is a thing, by the way. It's like oddly specific, but the Stress in America survey reveals that 67% of adults aged 18 to 34 say stress makes it difficult for them to focus. 58% describe their daily stress as completely overwhelming. And nearly half report that most days their stress is so bad, they're unable to function. So when I think about your work, I think I'm most interested in the idea, like, how do you help people with that? How do you help companies with that? And how do you make people like falling in love, as we said in the intro, with performing at their peak? Like, can you coach love? Because that's only as possible.
Yeah, okay. Yes, and you're about to fall in love.
Oh, I can't wait. Now. I already am. Go.
So a couple of things that you said that are really interesting I would touch on. The first is one of my favorite quotes from back in business school. We went together once upon a time. I remember a guy named Peter Drucker. It's probably the quote that guides my work the most, is culture eats strategy for breakfast. And you realize that no matter what your best laid plans are, it's going to be the culture of the organization and the dynamics between the people that really make a difference between success and whether you can execute or not. And so it's the first thing that I pay attention to. And when you talk about stress and culture, like in high performing environments, there is stress, and stress is important and necessary through an evolutionary lens for high performance. It's what activates us and what motivates us. And what I think that we have, and what you referenced in that HBR research, is that we now have an imbalanced relationship with stress. And so, I work around in the neuroscience of flow as it relates to peak performance. And one of the things flow does is it's kind of like a spa for your brain, because it actually powers down your prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is the part of our brain where, you know, as a species, why we've really gotten to the place we are, because we can think about the past, we can plan for the future, and a healthy amount of cortisol helps activate us to do things. But what's happened is, like, now this generation has more cognitive load, basically, than any other generation. Meaning, there's more things that people have to think about. The simplicity of times that might have been harder in some ways also lacked, like, thinking about social media and your relationships there, and 24-hour
Hmm.
news, and just a constant stream of stress coming at us. And the social media companies and other marketers know that human beings respond more to stress. Like, we'll click and scroll through things that are causing us stress as well.
Hmm.
And so basically, we're on this constant drip where, like, normally, like, coffee. I just started drinking coffee this year. I didn't used to, but
Oh man,
you're not supposed to have
it's
a coffee
great.
for like 90 minutes after you wake up, because your body, it is, I'm happy to be here, but you're not technically supposed to have one for like 90 minutes after you wake up, because your body produces cortisol and will wake you up. And if you just pour coffee on top of it, um, you're kind of like overdoing something your body already does for you. But what happens now is, like, we start in a state of stress. We check our phones first thing in the morning. We have like inputs coming at us, and then we stay in a state of stress all day. And that's basically, causes anxiety, where we're constantly thinking about the past and what we could have done differently, and the future and what we might want to do. And what flow does is brings us into the present moment. And there's a couple different criteria for that. And one is the balance between challenge and skill. And so if you're attempting something slightly harder than what you're used to being capable of, you rise to the occasion and you have to be present, because the stakes are typically high enough that you couldn't perform the task without getting there. And so we get a break from living in the past or the future in our minds, and we get to exist in the present. And it's a very
Hmm.
addictive and powerful feeling, because we actually connect to the here and now. And it's a moment where we're not thinking about anything else, and there's no anxiety in the moment. There might be stress and pressure of the situation that we're in, but when you're performing at peak levels, you're not actually thinking about any of that. You're just executing, and you're paying attention to some maybe fine motor skills if it's sports, or if it's something cognitive. Time either typically speeds up or slows down for you, because you're so present in the moment. So those are the things I think of immediately, like, in response to that question.
Rishi, being a software developer from my side, I think I've been in that flow state. And I think
Hmm.
that's when I've done my best work where, like hours have gone by. I know I've done a lot of work, but like I didn't eat, I didn't do anything.
What?
And all of a sudden I'm like, wow, I think I've been working on for like, 16
Yeah.
hours and I got a ton of stuff done, but it didn't really feel like that long amount of time. And I didn't eat. I just was like totally focused. It's that like flow state. So is this a thing for people? Like, do people like developers who are doing like highly cognitive focused tasks? Is this more common for people like me to experience this than regular people?
Yeah, it is actually. Developers have a culture around flow, and getting into the flow with coding, particularly. It's interesting. A lot of the research on flow actually comes from extreme sports, though, and like surfing, mountain climbing, that type of thing, because the stakes are high enough that you do need to be totally present. But there are, coders and software developers is an area where people know what you're talking about. But in other areas, people have no idea. They haven't really heard of it. And a lot of my work is helping people get aligned with their strengths, because that's one of the things that helps get us into flow, doing something that you do well naturally. And so the research is actually, really interesting. The number one predictor of success is one thing for people, depending on how you define success, and it's alignment with your strengths. So it's
Well, that
like,
makes
if
sense to
you are
me.
well aligned with your strengths and you're passionate about what you're doing, right? Yeah, those are some of the criteria that just will get you into that flow state. And we actually celebrate flow. We'll go watch athletes. We've traveled
Mm-hmm.
and been to World Cups and things together, and we've watched people go into flow. I was at the World Cup final in Qatar, and I turned to my friends and I was like, it was tied going into overtime, and I was like, they're both going to score again in overtime. And he's like, how do you
Right.
know that? I'm like, they're both in flow. Like, the two best players and the two best teams in the world are, you don't see it that often in a final like that. Like I get goosebumps talking about it. You can see it and feel it. And whether it's artists or athletes, we tend to go pay money to celebrate it, but we don't consciously bring it into our own lives that often. And so the talk that I give most often is how to live, work, and play in your flow state.
Yeah, that's really interesting because it's funny. I got a couple of thoughts on this. First off, is that I didn't really know that what I was doing was called like flow. You know what I mean? So like Chris is a developer. I guess like I think of there's that movie with like this. It's the social media movie about Mark Zuckerberg and his rise, and they have like getting in flow and like doing all that stuff. I can't remember the social network. That's what it's called. And I think about it's really common for coders, but like I did more like sales and marketing and other stuff. But I know that I could go through my day and it would honestly be like I get in there. It's 9:15. We have just finished our morning meeting. Honestly, I look down and look up. It's lunchtime. I look down and look up. It's time to go home. And it was just because like I was just flying through the stuff I had to do, and I was just so confident about it and so comfortable. It's very much. It's like it's not just a state of like high productivity. It's a state of like confidence and a state of comfort. I felt the best in that state. I always wanted to get back to it.
Yeah.
So do you have is there like a way, like I wasn't consciously triggering it. I was just going to work. So I'm wondering, is there, how do you trigger this? Like, how do I get into flow?
Right. Okay. So there's like 8 things according to research that's been done over a long time. And Stephen Kotler is one of the people in the modern world who's written a lot about this. And you can actually like take a test on how you get into flow. There's 4 flow profiles. And so there's like a deep thinker, hard charger, a crowd pleaser. And these are some of like examples of, things that get people into flow. Flow goer is the 4th one. And so I'm probably no surprise to you guys, hard charger, like adrenaline is what gets me going. And so before a big talk or a keynote or something, I'm like listening to like Calvin Harris EDM music and like jumping around backstage and like getting psyched up, because like for me getting into flow is that sort of kinetic energy for me. So that's one thing, is to know your flow profile. And you all just described, like, pay attention to anytime you notice the time dilation of either it's speeding up or slowing down. You should be paying attention to those moments and what you were doing. And you talked about like, it's not because the thing is easy, but you feel ultimately confident. And it's like, sidebar, I know we're all basketball fans. Like I actually like freeze framed a picture of the NBA Finals when Luka Doncic hit a shot the other game and yelled at Gobert, like, you can't defend me. The way he landed when he took that 3 with his arms behind him, you knew that the ball was still in the air. He knew that the shot was in, and we see that Steph Curry, guys like that, like, that you've got it before it's even done. And so it's a really cool feeling. It's a place you want to get back to. So pay attention to the things that make you feel that way in terms of that time dilation, that sense of mastery. And you also get focus for free when you're in flow, meaning like, that's why time just goes by. Like attention is something that companies and people compete for around the world. So if you notice you're getting energy from it, that's another way to tell. But I would say, like, to reliably recreate flow, you're just going to kind of want to figure out the things that get you there. And so some of the things from the research would, time dilation is where I start, but then also that you have a complete concentration on the task. And usually it's something you're passionate about that merges with your skills as well, because when those things come together, you're getting that focus for free. It's hard to be totally present on something that you don't enjoy doing as a starting point, right? If there's that sort of friction and you're watching the clock, this is like the opposite of that. And then you would also want clarity of reward and goals in mind. Like, you really know why you're doing this, and you're totally dialed in with like the purpose and the meaning of your work as well. It's something that, you truly care about, and you're getting direct feedback usually in the moment. Like, there's some sense, like if you're surfing a wave, a guy just broke the world record, a German, like 100+ foot wave in Nazaré, Portugal.
Cool.
Like, you're either like alive or not on the edge of that wave, but that can be the same in your work. There's usually some sense of continuous feedback that you're getting so that it's going well. And there are also dynamics between individual and group or team flow. And there's an interplay where like a group can pull an individual into flow, or an individual can pull a group into flow. And there's an interplay, and a lot of those dynamics come back to culture and trust and psychological safety, so that you feel like you can have the freedom to sort of fully express yourself without second thought. So hopefully that gives you some ideas of the things to pay attention to reliably recreate the sense of flow over time.
That's really interesting. Chris, have you ever heard of the concept of group flow? I've never thought of that before. I've always thought of flow as very much like an individual thing.
It is interesting. Yeah, Dave, it is interesting because I was thinking about our development team when we were running AppArmor, and psychological safety was one of the big things, because you really don't want somebody on your team that is, somebody puts out an idea, just brainstorming an idea, and somebody else just trashes it and makes the person feel silly. Like, that just destroys a development team. That is a non-functional development team. So psychological safety was always like right at the top of the list. But I don't think I knew all the stuff that Rishi just said, but I think there were pieces of it that we were implementing that might have worked. I wish I had known. I wish I had had the full picture when we're back, 5 years ago, when we were really into heavy duty development work, because I think we could have maybe optimized our team even further to be successful. Rishi, do you ever have situations where you're not just coaching like a person, but you're actually coaching like a team and trying to get them all to, find that team flow state?
Yeah, absolutely. That's something I focus on with organizations, is how to get their teams into flow and to recognize what that looks like and the dynamics between them. Um, an example would be like in sports, when you think about it, like you can tell when a team is in flow when they're operating almost like with a hive mind, and you can see it and sense it. And the same is true in the corporate world. Flow, in terms of business, boosts creativity by like hundreds of percent. And so if you see, we all have designated roles and working on a team, but there also can be some flexibility in that. I'll use a Ted Lasso analogy if people are familiar, but they talk about total football in that show, where like anyone can play anyone's position, and that is reliant on flow. It doesn't mean we don't have positions at work. So an example I recently used at my own work with my team is like, if the goalie's out of position, it doesn't mean a forward or a defender or anyone runs back and covers the net. And that's not something that has to be explicit. It's like you just sort of know. And if team and group flow brings it to another level, where you notice people taking cues off of each other because they're really dialed in to each other. And that psychological safety is so important because it gives you the freedom to experiment and be spontaneous for what's called for in the moment. So a couple interesting examples about that would be like the Navy SEALs. When they operate, they like actually recruit for flow to a degree, the types of people that will get into a group flow situation, and they don't really have hierarchy. So anyone who takes the lead in a given moment is the one everyone follows. And if that changes in the next moment, they'll all follow that person. You can almost think of like a flock of birds or a school of fish, the way that they move in sync and in unison with each other as well. So it's definitely something that can be taught and you can train for. And a lot of times it's the starting point of culture and removing some of the barriers to flow, because people have to be aligned with their positions of strength. They have to feel some psychological safety and trust. They have to be able to execute and then also be able to be spontaneous. But it's interesting because we both have kind of said, like, you might not know this explicitly, but you know that you've felt it and you've known it when you've seen it, probably looking back.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about, you just mentioned strengths there. And, I always think of, I need to work on the things that I'm weak at. I'm not good at, I remember I hated doing coding on SSO, single sign-on. I hated doing that stuff. It wasn't fun work. So I always tried to force myself to be good at that. Whereas I had other things that I loved working on. So database optimization, like looking at data structures, that kind of stuff. I really like doing it, but I would almost shy away from it and focus more on the things I didn't like. But you're talking about how this flow state, it's really hard to get into it unless you're doing something that you like, that you value. So what would be the recommendation for me? Like, just focus on the stuff I like, or still try and fight through so I know enough that I could be the goalie and run back and try and save it, even though I don't want to be a goalie? What's your recommendation there?
Well, you're not alone, Chris. And it's when I work with groups that range from students to executives or CEOs. And anytime I ask anyone, I usually start my talks like, what's more important to focus on, your strengths or your weaknesses? And I would say like 75+% of people, if not higher, say weaknesses.
Yeah.
And that's what I
can see
believe.
that.
It's what I grew
Yeah.
up. There's cultural reasons we're conditioned to believe that. And what, I told you also that the research shows us from high performance, like, you know, uh, the top performers, the best predictor of success is alignment with your strengths. So it's a fundamental shift in how you think
Hmm.
about things. And that does not mean not being aware of your weaknesses. That means that you bring people and maybe procedures around to support you, but knowing that, like another sports analogy, like the difference between Michael Jordan playing basketball versus baseball. He's a pretty good baseball player, but he's got six
Yeah.
rings when he's doing the thing that he's naturally best at, playing to his strengths. And I learned this lesson in my own life, sort of by accident, where it was actually for business school, the GMAT exam. I had always like struggled with it. I tore my
Oh.
Achilles tendon right the night before the exam. And long story short, like a year later, when I had to write it, I had this monkey on my back of standardized exams, and I was always better at one part of the exam than the other. So I wrote all these practice exams, and I was focusing on the area that I wasn't as strong in. When I
Yeah.
wrote the test, I finished and I got my results, and I did like worse than average on the area that I struggled with. And I had moved from like 75th percentile in the world to almost 100th percentile in the world in the area that I was strong in. And it's why I got into business school. And I had that conversation with them, and they're like, look, like we don't have people that are as strong as you in what you're strong in. You have
That's
to work your ass off on the
that's
other stuff.
wild.
Yeah,
That's crazy. I can't. I'm
yeah,
sorry to interrupt
Yeah,
you,
sound
but
familiar, Dave?
I literally had the exact same thing happen. Literally the exact same thing. I studied for the GMAT, went crazy for it, and I had one part of it. I'll just be honest with people. I was weaker in math. Okay, Chris is the math guy. I like math, just for the record, and I got into it
me too.
for
Me
sure.
and Dave.
Yeah, like I'm pretty sure I know where you were also weaker, but that's okay. So like we got into the math, and I was like, I gotta really, I had a tutor. I was doing all the things I needed to do. I was putting in the effort, like 3 hours a day studying for this stuff. And then I wrote the test multiple times. I wrote it 3 times, and the first 2 times I focused on where I was weak, and then the third time I was like, I should probably look at the English like grammar and like that part of it. And I did that, and I crushed it, and I got in. I got in because I had actually focused on the strength. And this is really interesting too, because again, it's another one of those things. And this is an interesting episode. One of those things where I didn't really think about it, but it's another thing that we were doing too. And we consider an organization, we consider AppArmor, one thing that we struggled with, particularly when you're a small team, right, is you don't have a lot of people, and it's a bad idea to hire generalists. Like generalists in small companies don't really work, particularly early on, because people are good at certain things and you need them to do those things, whether you knew about Flowstate or otherwise. And I think about some of our staff, and Chris and I, over the years, and Chris and I would have these conversations where like, look, it's really not working out with person A, and then we would say, so are we talking about a dismissal here? We've tried coaching them or everything like that. And then we'd be like, well, maybe they're just in the wrong seat. Maybe they're in the wrong place. And then we would look and we would think about their skills and be like, what are they good at? And then we would put them into a role that they're good at, and they would thrive. And it was the stupidest thing when you think about it. Like, what were we doing? So
Totally.
yeah. So I also wanted to there's something else I wanted to come back to, because you mentioned it earlier, and we were talking a bit about like you talked about like stress and how there's lots of it. Like I started the show with that, but there was also kind of this, you kind of alluded to sort of like this right amount of stress. And I think there's 2 sides to that. I'd be interested in sort of the like neurological sort of evidence. I am not a brain scientist, but I'd be very interested to hear what you have to say on that. And then the second part is that in that actually same HBR article, they mentioned a like sweet spot for stress, where like you don't actually want no stress, but you don't want too much of it either, because it just shuts you down. So I guess here's a weird question. I guess, can you be both, stressed and happy, or stressed and productive, or stressed and fulfilled?
Right. Okay. So, well, just to caveat, I'm not a brain scientist either, but I've studied the neuroscience of leadership. Like I have an executive certificate in that. And so from that lens, in terms of like the amount of stress that's good for you, if we get to the point where like, okay, it makes sense to focus on strengths, because whatever we're not good at, that's someone else's area of strength. right? So in a way, like, you might as well let someone who thrives in that do that. So I would differentiate, now that we're playing to our strengths, assuming that there's different types of stress. And there also are strengths that, I'll start with saying, like, there's strengths that are energizing and de-energizing. And actually, shout out to Paul Bowman, one of our career coaches,
The
who first pointed this
Bowmeister.
out to me.
All
He's like, there's
right.
stuff you're good at, the Bowmeister, that the first time I thought of it is, like, there's stuff that people will ask you to do, because people will ask you to do things that you're good at. You can pay attention. That's another example. If you're good at something, you might not even realize it. It's like, people keep kind of asking me to do this. Like, there's this idea of downstream effort. There's a TED talk on that. It's like, the things that, because we really worship grit, right? And so we talk about stress, where, like, Angela Duckworth has a model where, like, you work really hard and we kind of glorify that, but actually sometimes the hardest things we're doing can feel easy to us because we're doing them quite naturally. So to pay attention, like, the things that people are asking you to do, and after a day of coding, do you feel energized or de-energized? And that's different than feeling tired. Like, after a hard day of something you love, you can be tired and need to restore yourself, but are you energized by it or de-energized? Like, if I spend one of my strengths is in communicating and working and dealing with people. After this conversation, I know I'm going to have more energy from it relative to what I exerted in the conversation. Chris, I saw you.
Yeah, like, when I have those flow state moments of really being able to like, efficiently produce software that's good and works and all that sort of stuff, I am massively energized by it. Like, it is the hype train. It is the best feeling in the world. It is awesome. And even though I might have worked for 16 hours, I'm walking home from work clicking my heels that I'm got all this amazing stuff done, and it's been 16 hours with no food, so totally agree with that. Absolutely agree with that. Do you have that in sales, Dave? Does sales and marketing ever give you that feeling?
Well, I'll tell you what, you go through a day when you've done, 7 or 8 demos straight, and, like, you ate a sandwich in like a 5-minute period in the middle of the day, just because you're going between calls and one of them ended early. I'll tell you what, though, when you're going into those calls, I used to have this ability when I was really on my A game. So I guess when I was really in flow, where I could go and I could be doing the demo on one side of my screen and actually answering an email or two on the other side of my screen at the same time, because I was just like, I knew what I was talking about. I knew what zone, I knew what they were gonna like. Somebody's like, that's not a good sales practice, and they're right. You are right, but it was, I got really comfortable. I got really into this zone where I was like, I know I can do this with my eyes closed. I could shoot the free throw with my eyes closed, Michael Jordan style. So,
right. Well,
so I guess,
so that's what I would say is, like,
sorry, go ahead. Sorry, go ahead, Rishi. I didn't mean to cut you.
Oh, I'll get. So just to finish that thought, pay attention to the things that you're good at. And you might be good at some things that also just drain you. And you're like, I'm good at it, but it's not something I enjoy or I'm not passionate about. And so that's like an important distinction to make, is like, you might do something that people ask you to do that you are competent at, but it just doesn't give you that feeling that, that you described. And the other thing I wanted to say about stress is, the way that I look at it often with clients, especially in the coaching world, is, are you fighting the right fight? You're gonna work your ass off likely at something that you really care about, or something that you have to do if you're a conscientious person and you have some drive to succeed. But and Jim Carrey has a quote about this. He talks about it a little bit, but, like, if you're going to potentially fail and give everything, it should be your fight, like, not someone else's. And so I think about that often. Like, I've taken some big risks in my life, moved and changing, quitting my job, starting my business. And I'm like, at least if I fail giving this everything and hopefully being in flow and doing all the good things, then the stress is coming from me fighting the fight that's personally meaningful for me. And that is going to give me enough energy to hopefully succeed in the long term and survive, because some of these things are a marathon in life, not a sprint. And so I think about the stress that comes from fighting the right fight versus someone else's as an important distinction to make for yourselves in your careers or in the businesses that you're running, especially if you're a capable person. It's always interesting when I work with people that, like, you guys are a good example. You could do a lot of different things with your time, energy, and intelligence. And are you doing the thing that really puts you into flow and energizes you and gives you the resilience? Because flow like leads to resilience as well, I believe, because you're like, damn, this is the thing I care most about. And even if I'm getting my ass kicked right now at it, I'm going to get up, like a little bit of Rocky. I'm going to get back up and do it again. Whereas if it's the wrong fight, it's like, oh, why am I doing this?
Yeah, that's interesting. I do think that I walk away from these conversations because what we're really trying to do here, right, is to sort of like pay it forward, help other entrepreneurs learn from the mistakes that we've made or from the lessons that we can, pull out of our expert guests, from these shows. And I do find I have, like, I'm pretty happy about it. I feel really good once we're done. It is a very satisfying sort of feeling. I wanted to just finish today because we're just running out of time here, but I want to finish today with one last thing, and it's going to be asking you about a myth. And I actually think we've confronted quite a few different like business myths today. Did you have one in particular that you wanted to share with the audience?
Yeah, well, I think sort of an extension of what we're talking about is just like waiting for the right time to get it right. If you have something you want to go after, like just start now and learn by doing. I mean, you guys are great examples of like just get in there and figure it out as you go. We don't have perfect business plans. We don't have the answers. We're in a rapidly evolving market. The technology is changing. It's like I think a lot of time people are waiting to get it right and have the right time to start. I think part of starting up different is starting up at all. The fact that you like create the inertia to get going. And along with that, I think people are overwhelmed sometimes with the things that they could say yes to in life. And I like to simplify that. And so that myth that you have to know and you have to get it exactly right, it's like just start somewhere and then, but be more conscious almost on what you say yes to what you say no to. Because if you're playing your weaknesses, if it doesn't excite you, if it doesn't energize you, if it doesn't bring you into flow, like set your non-negotiables and draw a hard line and be like, no matter what, I'm not doing this. And that's a highly personal thing. For some people, that's like, I value my family time and I'm not working evenings or weekends. Or someone else, it might be like travel. Like I want to travel. It's part of my life. I'm not going to sacrifice that. So, when you're designing your career and your life, think about like just start on the thing that you've been imagining doing. Don't wait to get it right. And maybe start by saying no to the wrong things that create space for you to sort of wander in the right direction, as I call it.
I love
Good
it.
advice.
Love it. I love that's very, very profound. And thank you so much, Rishi, for joining us. Thank you, folks, for listening today. That was another episode of Startup Different, an awesome conversation with Rishi Behari. Check out his company's Flowstate Coaching and Consulting and Life by Design Lab. And thank you so much for the time, folks. We will see you next week. Hey, you made it all the way to the end of the episode. Nicely done. If you enjoyed this episode, like, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so the almighty algorithm can help others find us. Want more from Startup Different? Check out our book, Startup Different, the myth-busting blueprint for your multi-million-dollar business. Follow us on social. We're big on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can also check us out at startupdifferent.com. See you next week.